En route to Nice on Friday, I found a seat in a first-class compartment of the Paris-Nice carriage. The compartment was already occupied by an English captain, an English nurse, and a French officer. I made the fourth, and there was space for two more, as each compartment of the premier class has seats for six. A young French lieutenant of the male sex and one of the remaining sex inquired if there were any seats available. We answered in the affirmative, and they crowded into our compartment. But the original Frenchman apparently found some friends or more interesting traveling companions and only used his space for coat and baggage, so the five of us rode together. At first the conversation divided itself into two parts and languages. We three spoke English, while the two French militaires carried on an animated discussion of the war, politics, the black markets, and sundry other subjects. I could catch part of their conversation without appearing to eavesdrop. All this time they were consuming a lunch of sandwiches and water. Finally, the young lady turned to me and said, "Israelite?" I replied, "Oui," and she nodded her head, "Moi aussi." Then the dialogue between us continued in Yiddish and French. Later, all but the English nurse joined in the talk, for the English captain was a resident of Paris, had lived there for more than 20 years, and had studied at the Sorbonne. But most of the talk is immaterial to the story of Rivka. Her whole name is Rivka Klein. She's about 31 now and a native of Poland. She came to Paris about 11 years ago and struggled for a living. I believe she told me she lived with her husband for a few years in the unmarried state, but then decided that she liked it, and he did too. They were married. Perhaps they wanted to give their child a name, for she does have a child of 3 or 4 years of age. Came the war and the Nazis. The little family fled to Grenoble and lived covertly with false passports in the manner endured by so many thousand European Jews during the occupation. But Rivka and her husband were people of spirit and courage. They joined the FFI and fought in the underground and the Grenoble area just before and after the Allied invasion of France. Her husband was killed in the fighting. She carried on with her job of carrying munitions, food, and other supplies to the front, and with the work of sabotage. She never did any sabotage herself, but aided in finding vital spots and planning the destruction. Finally, on one of her missions, she got hers, wounded in the legs, the thigh, and part of the upper body, probably shrapnel. Rivka wears a Croix de Guerre and the French equivalent of the Purple Heart. Now she is spending her last few months in the French army. Soon she will be discharged and given a small pension, but for the present she is enjoying a convalescent journey at the expense of her government. A child of the ghetto, a child of poverty, she has never seen much of how the other half of the world lives. Rivka in the first class compartment, Rivka in the Riviera, Rivka in Nice and Cannes is Rivka in Wonderland. She ohs and ahs at everything, and I think pinches herself to see if it is true. But my little Polish, Jewish, French warrior is no naive child, no babe in the woods. First of all, she is a communist, because otherwise for her and her kind there seems to be no future in France or in Europe. She's not a Zionist, doesn't want to go to America, where she has a brother in New Jersey, does not want to become rich, but wants to work in the Communist Party. She's anti-religious and I think assimilationist from the radical point of view. And my little friend of the train is bitter and cynical and pessimistic. So are many here. They have little faith in the United Nations, in democracy, and in the other hopes of the world. They believe they will have to fight their way into and out of the future. Life offers them so little, and for some, communism is the escape from utter despair. Close quote, quoting a passage from the letter. At this point in this casual and unstructured report, I shall answer the question about the carrying of munitions or guns or collecting them to be sent to Palestine. I mentioned earlier Chaplain Abe Hazelcorn of the Western Base Section in Marseille. I think Chaplain Hazelcorn can tell you a great deal about this, for he had a good number of contacts in Marseille and also in Nice. Later I made the same contacts in Nice, and possibly I met some of the Zionists in Marseille. I'm not sure. I do remember, nevertheless, that I carried a box from Marseille to Nice, and I have very grave suspicions, although I never looked into the box, and although Hazelcorn might not have told me what was in the box, but I do have grave, serious suspicions that the box contained ammunition or guns, or perhaps even machine guns of one kind or another. It was a rather large box. There might have been one or two other occasions when I carried packages of this nature to Nice, but it was agreed that it would be best if we did not exchange too much information, because as you understand, this was absolutely against the regulations of the United States Army. I doubt if any of us will be court-martialed now, 30 years later. Jumping ahead a little bit, when I was stationed in Paris at the end of my tour of duty in Europe, I did give a few guns to the head of the Jewish agency in Paris at that time and the leader of the Aliyah Bet, but we'll come to that soon. From time to time, when situated in the various Army installations, I would receive messages from the states asking me to look up or to try to find refugees related to people living in the states, and or else to find people who had not been in concentration camps but who had possibly survived the war. I made every effort whenever I got one of these requests to fulfill it, sometimes successfully and sometimes not so successfully. In November of 1945, I visited a children's home in Marseille. This home was run by the Unitarian Service Committee, and although I do not remember very much about it, I still have a good impression of the place and the attitude of the Unitarians who wanted to find, whenever possible and wherever possible, the parents of these children and to return them to their homes or to their parents. I quote from a letter sent to my two daughters near the end of November 1945. This morning, Daddy began the preparation of the Hanukkah bags for the little children of X. In each bag, the children will find a fruit bar, toothbrush, face towel, toothpaste, chewing gum, and candy. I hope that they will like the presents, and in fact, I am sure that they will. Although I do not mention the source of the items placed in the bags, I do recall that the Red Cross people in Aix-en-Provence gave me a number of items to be distributed amongst the children, and it is very likely that face towels and toothpaste came from this organization. Furthermore, when I left Aix-en-Provence for my next assignment, which was to the 165th General Hospital in Nice, the Red Cross in Nice gave me much material which could be used by the OSE in Nice, Ouvre de Sécurité des Enfants, and also at the time the 228th General Hospital closed down. The colonel and other authorities were very kind and allowed me to purchase several $100s worth of items to take with me for the use of OSE in Nice. The Jewish Welfare Board furnished the money. Colonel Woodruff was kind enough to assign to me an ambulance to carry all this material to Nice for delivery to OSE. I quote from a letter written in December 1945, or it might have been in late March. The Hanukkah party tonight was a huge success. About 150 persons were there, GIs, officers, and young civilians. We started with the lighting of the candles and had a supper of fish, salami, bread, and potato latkes, washed down with Coca-Cola. There was plenty of food, but we could have used a little more Coke, despite the fact that I had purchased 5 cases, or 120 bottles. Later we sang, told stories, and then tried to dance. Unfortunately, the loudspeaker on the photograph failed to function, and the music was not audible. All in all, it was a grand party at Poznansky's Kosher Restaurant in Nice, number 1 Rue Longchamp. We broke up at midnight with many still reluctant to leave. Period. Closed letter. Where did the money come from? Again, I believe that the JWB might have furnished some of the funds, and also I had on hand money sent to me from various individuals and organizations in the United States. Where did the salami come from? Of course, you understand that the JWB sent us from time to time packages with a number of sticks of salami. These sticks of salami were amongst the most welcome receivables. About this time of the year, about Hanukkah time, I attended a meeting of the B'nai B'rith in Nice. On another occasion, I attended a meeting of the Jewish War Veterans Organization of France. On both occasions, I had the opportunity to say a few words in French. And among other civilian meetings which I attended was one of the victims of Nazi barbarism in X. This was a general organization, but I had been invited through my Jewish friend of mine, Inga Traub. And Inga Traub has a very interesting story of her own. Inga had lived in Paris, had been married. At this time, I was at the time of which I'm speaking, the night of the meeting of the victims of Nazi barbarism, she was waiting for final divorce papers so that she could marry a non-Jewish Russian who would reach France somehow, by name Michel, who is a professional photographer. Inga and her husband, at last report, were living in Providence, Rhode Island, where he was practicing his trade as photographer. A moment or two ago, I mentioned the collecting of material for Oze, and in a letter dated this November 27th, I make mention of Oze. Yesterday afternoon, I spent about an hour at the Oze headquarters, 31 Avenue de la Victoire. This organization devotes itself primarily to the health of its clientele and especially concerns itself with the children. A Monsieur Abadi, A-B-O-D-I, is the director, and I must say that he is very much on the ball. This was the first real opportunity he had to show me the offices and the records. I do not believe that any organization could, under the circumstances, have more detailed or better collated data than Oze has in its files. Each child has a dossier, and all information concerning parents, health, personality, physical environment is found in the dossier. Then for each child there is a supply card, and on this card is noted each item down to a candy bar issued to him and when. I gave Mr. Abadi most of the supplies I received from the Red Cross, and also most of the candy Hazelcorn received from some other sources and which he sent to Nice. I am certain that Oze will make a wise and efficient and honest distribution of all these items. Quotation from letter dated November 31st, 1945, from Nice. Yesterday afternoon, I spent about an hour with an interesting gentleman. He had asked a mutual friend about a possible contact with a rabbi, and Madame Carmona asked me if I would visit him. He is a member of an old Jewish family of France, rather assimilated. His family has been military for generations, but he is something of a scholar, an historian who has written texts for the French schools. At the present time, he is inspector of academies in this area. He speaks only French, but we managed to get along rather well. He wanted to know about Jewish life in America, with a special reference to religious groupings. I shall return Tuesday night and visit him as long as I remain in X. Correction. The quotation in the above is from a letter written from Nice, or in Nice. From another letter written in X. Last night I visited some new people here in X, a Jewish couple. He is of Polish origin, she of an old French family. It's migrated from Spain and Portugal. They have a lovely apartment and it contains some beautiful art objects, including two works by Abel Pan, P-A-N-N. The wife has done some painting, and although she is not a first-class artist, she has very good taste. The conversation was in French. Hardly a day goes by now that I do not visit with people who speak only their native tongue, which is, of course, French. From a letter, Dateline Nice, Sunday, December 16th. This morning there was another memorial service at the French synagogue in memory of the victims of Nazism and in conjunction with a general observance throughout all of France. Again, I spoke in French for a matter of 10 minutes. Evidently, I was understood, for the people discussed my talk among themselves, and I heard from my own S2. Close letter. I describe the synagogue as French, as being the one which belonged to the consistoire, because in Nice there existed at the time two other congregations which held services in the same building, apart, of course, from the consistoire congregation. The two synagogues, or the two congregations, rather, were Hasidish and Ashkenazi. Or one might want to say Mitnaged. From a letter dated January 25th, Nice. Tomorrow I am going with a group of orphan children to Monte Carlo. Most of them are from a home in Paris and are here for a brief vacation. They have suffered so much during the war that it's very nice that they can have a little fun now. The others are from a home at San Maxime, about 60 miles from here. I asked the Army for a bus to take the children to Monte Carlo, and the Army was kind enough to let me have one. All the officers help the chaplains as much as possible in their work, and although the little country of Monte Carlo is off limits for all American soldiers, the colonel is giving me permission to go with the children. It's only about 12 miles from here. We shall spend a couple of hours there and then return. Aside from another letter written the 5th I quote one line which refers to the Monte Carlo excursion. The JWP paid all costs, which amounted to $10. During the month of January 1946, I was transferred to the American Army University at Biarritz. In Biarritz, I wrote to my wife, quote, "My civilian work continues. Each day someone comes to the office with a request for help of some kind or other. So far, I have discovered no relief committee, and I shall have to do some from this office. That is why I am anxious for food and clothing. So ship packages at once." On this particular letter. This passage from a letter written late January 1946 from Biarritz might be of interest. Friday morning, the speaker for the Brandeis Forum arrived from Paris. He is Abbott Kaplan, a very fine young man who served as an officer in the Navy in the Pacific, in PT boats, and then on the flagship of a PT squadron. Kaplan came home from the Pacific, felt that he wanted to help in the European situation, and accepted a job with JDC. He is in charge of JDC work in France and dispenses through local agencies some millions of dollars each year. Unfortunately, I could not spend much time with him. He is still in Biarritz and staying at the villa. But yesterday, after the service, I took a group of 19 soldier students to Bordeaux to visit the Société des étudiants juifs there and to meet the Bordeaux community. We just returned from the visit and did have a fine time. We arrived in Bordeaux about 2, went to the hotel and checked in. Then the local youth guided our men on a brief tour of the city à pied, on foot. At 5, we went to what might be termed a community house for a meeting and reception. Then after 6, the older people came. Food was sold at the buffet for the benefit of the student society. The food was rather meager, but then at public affairs little else can be expected in France. The group danced until midnight to music furnished by a recorder hooked to a loudspeaker. The soldiers had a nice time. Speeches were made in French, which I translated, and then I responded in the language of the country. Today we all went to private homes for dinner, and very nice dinners. Of course, the food was purchased on the black market. At my host, we had seafood, soup, chicken, potatoes, cake, and coffee. Some of the boys reported fine steaks as the pièce de résistance. Saturday evening, I also attended services at the synagogue and met the rabbi. He's a fine-looking gentleman of 70. He hid from the Germans after a narrow escape and lived under a false name. He also came to the party this afternoon after the dinner. Then I walked to his house, and then he honored me by escorting me to the station. The Bordeaux Synagogue is a magnificent structure built about 80 years ago. However, the Nazis stripped and ruined the interior. They used the building as a prison, and they shot many people within its walls. It's the worst damaged building that I have yet seen among the synagogues of France and Belgium. From a letter dated February 4th from Biarritz. I have about 20 minutes before my Jeep comes to take me to Bayonne. where I hope to meet with some of the members of the Jewish consistoire and to complete some arrangements begun by Chaplain Rakovsky for the circumcision of boys born during the occupation. Chaplain Rakovsky is quite orthodox, and for him, this was a very important arrangement, and he will be here for the circumcisions next week. I shall probably be in Paris. Yesterday I went with soldiers and a few young whacks to the Hakshara at Vie Secure. Villeseccure. Left here in 2 trucks about 10 in the morning. The ride took about 2 hours and covered 100 kilometers. If you are checking my travel on the map, the closest point might be Po, P-A-U. The trip was rather nice, for in the distance and parallel to the road, we could see the snow-capped Pyrenees. The Hakshara is right in this little village of Via Secure, population about 300, if you stop to count. The young people, about 35 in number, occupy an old building described as a castle, but no great king ever lived there. It's a fairly nice building with 3 or 4 floors and many rooms, no running water, and therefore no what we call in Europe WC, capital W, capital C. The Chalutzim and Chalutzot are rather courageous, optimistic lot. Most of them were born in East Europe but went to Holland before the war. Some saw the concentration camps. Others remained at home and did valiant work in the Dutch underground. We had lunch here, food contributed by the Army. I'll tell you about that to get home. And some eggs. They did wonders with sea rations, and one could almost enjoy them. In fact, if I had not known their rations, I think I would have enjoyed them. After the repast, the guys and their hosts walked around the not so extensive grounds and talked and became acquainted. Then a gentleman from Palestine, associated with the Chalutz movement, and in France to contact these Haksharot, made a little talk in Yiddish, and one of the boys interpreted. From time to time I interposed an interpretation of the interpretation, but everyone seemed to enjoy it. At 5 we left the Hashara and we arrived here in time for the last call for Miss. A letter from Biarritz dated February 21st. I think I should tell you about a character here by the name of Malka. Last name I do not know. She's of Polish origin, about 20 years of age. Her husband escaped to North Africa and is supposed to be on the way here. He should only hurry. Malka works as a sort of maid to support her little boy of 3. She earns very little, and I help her with food and with clothing. Today she came in wearing an old pair of tennis sneakers, and I gave her a brand new pair of shoes, which someone had sent me. They were a little big, reminded me about the gag, about 7 being the right size, but 8 felt so good that the man bought a pair of 9s. Malka is none too bright. In fact, I think from her stories and remarks that she may be a little Meshuggah. She dances around here like a child with a new toy, and later I saw her in the streets. She was as one walking on air, poor child. Although she sometimes annoys me with her talk, though she wastes a lot of time with her mices, I try to be very patient to her when she keeps saying Rebbe this and Rebbe that. A letter dated Biarritz, February 22nd. The other day I visited an orphan home near here. Most of the children were in school, but I did see a few of the little girls. These children were originally from Czechoslovakia, and many will return there in due time. The home was once a great villa with barns and servant houses, and even a little chapel. Now it is rather old and in bad condition. I took a box of candies and gums donated by the soldiers from their PX rations. During my brief tour of duty in Biarritz, I met a family from the area by the name of Levy. I cannot find any reference to this family in the collection of letters which my wife has preserved, and it's very likely that some of the letters have been lost. We have made several moves during the 30 years, and the possibility of loss of letters was indeed very great. However, Levy was a man about 50 years of age at the time, and his mother and sister and he had remained in the had come down to the area after the occupation of Paris by the Germans, and had remained in this small town near Biarritz. It might have been Bayonne. Despite the extension of the occupation to all of France. Levy told me a very interesting story about a visit to his home one day by several German officers. The family feared that this meant great trouble for them, but the officers simply asked if this were the home of General Levy, for the father of the family had been a major general in World War I. On the mantel place over the fireplace of the living room, there was kept, if I recall correctly, in a glass enclosure, the kepi, the military cap of the high-ranking officers of the French army during First World War and also during the Second World War. The officers simply walked up to the mantelpiece, saluted the kepi, and walked out. The Germans, but before they did walk out, the Germans asked the location of a Jewish cemetery and if the general were buried there. They asked to be taken there, and they were done by Levy accompanying them and directing their chauffeur to the cemetery. They approached the grave of the general, saluted, and then departed. Also, while stationed in Biarritz, I had a very interesting wedding at the synagogue there. The synagogue really was used very little during the occupation, and we did use it as for army services. This was a marriage of an officer and a local French girl. And if I told the story above, please forgive the repetition. wedding ceremony received a great deal of attention and publicity in the community and in the local newspaper. I might also mention at this time that the one very bad experience with non-Jewish chaplains was at Biarritz. In a quotation from a letter which I previously recorded, I mentioned that I would tell my wife about certain aspects of the visit to the Hakshara after I returned to the United States. The reason for this statement was the aforementioned relations with the chaplain. When Rakowski was at Biarritz, he gathered in his office a great deal of material, food, clothing, etc., given to him by the GIs for the relief of local community whenever necessary, and also for the Hakshara period. Before going to the Hakshara, an event which I had planned for a number of weeks, I had also collected from the GIs all surplus clothing that they might have, all rations that they might be able to spare, and even a few items which had been taken from the kitchen and the commissary and the PX surplus items, which the Army could not use and which would be very useful to our chalutzim and chalutzot. The Catholic chaplain was aware of this, and he frequently threatened to report it to the commanding officer and all to cause other troubles for Rakowski and myself. However, his was more bark than bite, and he never did bring charges, and if he did bring charges, the superior officers paid no attention to them, and so nothing happened. However, it was rather unpleasant to be associated with him. Biarritz Army University closed down in March, and I was transferred to the Western Base Section headquarters in Paris. At this time, I was the only Jewish chaplain in all of France. The Paris office was at times a very busy place, not only with the soldiers coming in with their various problems, also with a rather large number of civilians coming to see what the chaplain could do for them. One of the great problems at this time was the desire of the former inmates of concentration camps who had come to Paris and who desired to leave for the United States of America. Some had relatives and some had no one in the States, but they believed this to be the promised land. Unfortunately, most of them were born in Poland, and nothing at all could be done for them. Inquiries with JDC and inquiries with the American consulate revealed a large number of applicants from Poland, that is, of Polish extraction, who wanted to file for America, period. We were told that it would be absolutely useless to register these men and women because they would have to wait many, many years due to the limited quota for Polish-born DPs. Number of quotas available for Polish-born. interesting experience was the arrival one day of a woman, a native of Paris, or at least a resident of Paris for many years before the war, perhaps a native of Eastern Europe, who had escaped and had gone to England and remained there during hostilities. She brought with her that day American currency, rotted, crumbled, deteriorated, almost unrecognizable as such. She said the total amount was $5,000, and that if I somehow would transport the remains of the $5,000 to the United States and collect from the Treasury, I could keep any portion of the money that I desired and send her the remainder. Period. Of course, I refused and sent her to the JDC, but I do not recall if the JDC ever reported to me on this matter, and I still wonder to this day if the woman ever got her $5,000 with the help of JDC or some other Jewish agency.